Hi, my name is Lily, and today I'd like to do a video on the concept of evil, or the very least, what makes someone so caught up in their own experience that they're willing to disregard others' feelings with their own actions or even maliciously trying to tear someone else down. I have seen a lot of people in the world throughout my life who do things that I would never do, cruel things, and I definitely sit back and wonder, what really makes us so different inside, that we have such different ways of interacting with people and navigating the world. There is obviously the psychological differentiation that we can make, that they probably had a troubled childhood where there was neglect, abuse, or other traumatic factors. When people grow up in a very negative home environment where they don't feel loved or supported, they may develop antisocial behaviors. When the people around you are mean, abusive, or untrustworthy growing up, it can give this perspective that all people are like that. This can create a defense mechanism where they develop harmful patterns of behavior in order to protect themselves, such as psychologically, emotionally, or physically manipulating others. In this case, they are disregarding others' wants, desires, and needs for their own agenda. This is making sure that they have the power and the upper hand when, as a child, they probably felt very powerless. Now they seek to take power away from others. Childhood is the foundation of your life, and it's where you learn the basics about how the world works. It is a very critical time for development. Therefore, you normally end up mimicking those same behaviors that you have now observed in others. Substance abuse is another pattern that is often observed and repeated in families. If the parents have unhealthy coping mechanisms, they will demonstrate that to the children. This then creates more problems, as people who are drinking or on drugs are not thinking clearly. This perpetuates more abuse in the family and more poor decision making. However, there are children who go through traumatic things and they recognize the harm that is caused to them, and they work hard not to pass on that trauma to other people or children. But then there are others who follow in those footsteps and repeat those same behaviors as their parents. What drives that difference? I think personality, perhaps, but I also think the answer lies in the soul and where it was before this present lifetime. I think this has to do with past lives and past patterning. This is similar to the concept of what takes more precedence when analyzing human behavior, nature, or nurture. Genetics are also related to past patterns within a family. Sometimes behavior is genetically influenced instead of directly observed and mimicked. More emotionally evolved souls will recognize the harm of abusive people and strive to do better, while more unevolved souls will repeat the patterns until they realize the destruction it has on themselves and other people. The problem is that sometimes these souls dive deeper into their negative patterns and keep them throughout their lifetime. They sink themselves deeper into darkness instead of trying to find the light. This is ultimately disconnection from the heart space or the heart chakra. If you have the wisdom of past lives, then it'll be easier to tap into that more evolved side. If you don't, then it may take some more self-sabotaging destruction and destruction of others before you grasp the negative impact of your actions. It is painful to recognize one's mistakes, especially the realization that we have hurt the people that we love or that have loved us. So often people avoid this pain and this self-reflection. They self-medicate, they stay in distractions, and they stay disconnected. Eventually the pain will need to be felt at some point, if not in this lifetime, then another one. Growth comes with pain. I think some people who are behaving in harmful ways to other people are not even aware of how their actions may be affecting other people. They aren't doing much self-reflection and are unconsciously letting their shadows control them and their behavior. I feel that a soul that is not so advanced in evolution may be more susceptible to following a crowd of people or example of people who are acting in a way that is harmful towards other people. I think there are a lot of people on the internet who spew out harmful perspectives that influence people to handle things by forcing control or manipulation. They feel entitled to power and control. They want to exploit the weaker people instead of wanting to help them and have everybody have a fair chance in society as well. They do not want equality, they want domination and control. This is considered wounded masculine energy. Anger can take over a person and then they can cling to that anger. Oftentimes it can be a means of trying to protect oneself from getting hurt again, but it ends up destroying you and eventually causes disease and halts spiritual growth. It is easier to hold on to anger and it is harder to let it go and open your heart and choose forgiveness, even to people who do not deserve it. Forgiveness is for yourself and not them. There are people online who can pry into the inner darkness and rage of people and say get them to commit certain crimes. More and more terrorist groups are getting vulnerable or impressionable Americans to betray their own country and join extremist groups because they were able to manipulate them. I'm sure it's probably happening like all over the world, but Americans are, yeah. They can get people to connect with that inner rage and channel it into a collective target. When you are disconnected from the heart chakra, you are operating from the lower chakra centers. Decisions and actions that are made without consulting the heart are without empathy, compassion, and love. An overactive solar plexus chakra is where one seeks to take power over others. This desire for power and control can lead people to do evil things. The allure of power can be very inviting, especially when it's tied to sexual energy. It is very seductive and snake-like. I talk about this more in my video about sexual energy and predators. It is a pit that keeps you going deeper and deeper and often always leads to narcissistic behaviors. The desire to take control of others at the expense of their own free will, desire, and autonomy. Narcissistic people often think that they are the true victims and so they don't care about harming other people. They feel their harmful reactions are justified and refuse to acknowledge or are unable to see their own distortions. Unfortunately, most people who seek out power often get it in some form or another. People seeking power like this will often strive for bigger and better to fill that void. They will stop at nothing to get what they want: money, power, influence, or perceived success. They are always after more because true power comes from within and not taking it from others. A true leader is beloved for their qualities of integrity, respect, and care for the people while not prioritizing their own agendas. They seek the betterment of all citizens and do not rule with fear and manipulation. There are also people who are true sociopaths or psychopaths. Characteristics of a sociopath is that they lack remorse, but guilt and empathy may be present in some cases. Some emotions are felt like rage, but are often fleeting. They may form close attachments with one or few individuals. They generally have consistent irresponsibility and repeated violations of the law, constant lying and deception, and aggressive and reckless behavior. While characteristics of a psychopath are that they lack remorse, guilt, and empathy completely, they pretend to feel emotions, they have the inability to form true emotional attachments, they tend to be successful, dishonest, present manipulative behavior, narcissism, and superficial charm. People like this will also be more likely to do things that we could categorize as evil, as they do not have empathy or remorse. Sometimes people who exhibit psychopathic tendencies from a young age grew up in a relatively normal home environment. There wasn't any major abuse or neglect that would obviously propel them into extreme antisocial behavior. In cases like this, I think past life might be the driving force here. Some people may also resort this to genetics, and some people say in order to be a true psychopath, you have to have some sort of like genetic predisposition and abuse, or not necessarily, but there definitely is something that is not just reliant on environmental factors. I think the past life could also be an influence in some of these cases. I think maybe in a past life, people like this may have also been involved in similar violent behavior. In this lifetime, they were given an opportunity to try and not be as violent by being born into a more normal family, but they ended up succumbing to that shadow side that they had from past lives. The foundations for the belief in natal astrology are that the birth chart shows a map to one's life. It's a study of fate and fortune. This has made me wonder before, are some people destined to be bad people, or to at least cause a lot of chaos into the world? Most people, I would say, exhibit good and bad characteristics throughout their life, but there are some who may lean more extremely into either direction. I do think we always have choices in life, and we can definitely always choose a higher path or a lower path. The lower path may be perceived as easier or repeating past shadow patterns. But ultimately, the soul does want positive growth forward towards the light. In astrology, each sign archetype has a shadow energy to recognize, heal, and integrate into the personality. If they don't, then they will embody these more negative characteristics to that energy, and they will be controlled by their shadow, leading to stagnancy. Now I want to talk about a book I read called The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang, in which they described a holocaust that happened in the city of Nanjing, China, in 1937 by the Japanese military. Making this video actually took me a bit longer because the information I'm sharing about this is very heavy, and I get sad thinking about what the Chinese had to endure in this Holocaust. The book spells the city like Nanking, which was the spelling used before in English, but the correct spelling and pronunciation is Nanjing, unless Google lied to me. It was first published in 1997. For a greater portion of this video, I'm going to be discussing some of what happened and applying it to the topic of the video. There is a lot of overlap. Within weeks of the first attack, more than 300,000 Chinese civilians and soldiers were systematically raped, tortured, and murdered, with the death toll exceeding that of the atomic blasts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. A lot of what happened in this attack, I think a lot of people would consider evil. This is one of the examples in history where I wonder what was going on in their heads that would compel people to act in such harmful ways. I wonder because if you can understand how people get to that dark of a place, then you can understand how to prevent it as best you can. Things like this are still going on over the world, not necessarily to this scale, but definitely in the shadows, or a lot of crimes against humanity are being heavily documented and shared on the internet right now, more than it ever has been. So China and Japan had a lot of tension with each other for a while, leading up to Japan launching an undeclared war on China in the 1930s. To prepare for an inevitable war with China, Japan had spent decades training its men for combat. The molding of young men to serve in the Japanese military began early in life, and in the 1930s, the martial influence seeped into every aspect of Japanese boyhood. Toy shops became virtual shrines to war, selling arsenals of toy soldiers, tanks, helmets, uniforms, rifles, anti-aircraft guns, and bugles and howitzers. A quote from the book: Japanese schools operated like miniature military units. Some of the teachers were military officers who lectured students on their duty to help Japan fulfill its divine destiny of conquering Asia and being able to stand up to the world's nations as a people second to none. They taught young boys how to handle wooden models of guns and older boys how to handle real ones. Textbooks became vehicles for military propaganda. One geography book even used the shape of Japan as a justification for expansion. We appear to be standing in the vanguard of Asia, advancing bravely into the Pacific. At the same time, we appear ready to defend the Asian continent from outside attack. They were brainwashed into hatred. This was the foundation of a very deadly type of soldier and military. Another quote from the book: by the 1930s, the Japanese educational system had become regimented and robotic. It was a commonplace for teachers to behave like sadistic drill sergeants, slapping children across the cheeks, hitting them with their fists, or bludgeoning them with bamboo or wooden swords. The point being highlighted here is that the hatred for the Chinese was deep. The indoctrination of children to be raised and encouraged to like warfare and to feel it is their duty and destiny to overtake China. Students were forced to hold heavy objects, sit on their knees, stand barefoot in the snow, or run around the playground until they collapsed from exhaustion. The pressure to conform to authority intensified if the schoolboy decided to become a soldier. Vicious hazing and relentless pecking order usually squelched any residual spirit of individualism in him. Obedience was touted as a supreme virtue, and a sense of individual self-worth was replaced by a sense of value as a small cog in this larger scheme of things. They often physically abused them and said they did so because they cared about them. Some youths died under these conditions, and some committed suicide. Some went into military training where the conditions were still very extreme. This is showing major abuse and lack of love in these children's lives and had them grow up without knowing much empathy or softness. This is kind of how it was for a lot of children who were around at that time in the United States as well, or even the generation after, which was the baby boomers. They were to be seen and not heard. A child's emotions were not considered important for a lot of adults. They were just supposed to obey. It is only more recently, as humanity, are we really analyzing parenting styles and which behaviors that were socially acceptable before are now considered abusive. If you neglect a child's emotions and are brainwashed to believe any amount of mercy is bad, this can create adults where they too lack that empathy towards others, which is disconnection from the heart chakra. It destroys your self-worth, especially as a child. They break you so that you obey, and you don't believe that you deserve better or that your desires matter. The philosophy of the samurai in Japan was that the greatest honor was to die in service to one's lord. If the samurai failed to do so, then he would have to commit suicide by dismembering himself in front of witnesses. It is death over surrender. There is definitely an honor and valor to sacrificing oneself for fighting for one's country. However, under the guise of being a soldier, you can commit atrocious acts that otherwise you would be prosecuted for that now you can get away with. Because you work for the government, it's allowed, with the notion of defending one's country. Sometimes the country is not acting as a way of defense, but for control over territory and people in which they do not belong. This conflict continued between Japan and China. After Shanghai finally fell in November of 1937, the mood of the imperial troops had turned ugly, and many, as it said, lusted for revenge as they marched toward Nanjing. Okay, so now I'm going to describe more of what specifically the Chinese endured during this invasion, and it is pretty disturbing. So if you don't want to hear the details, I would recommend skipping ahead. I'm going to put a time somewhere maybe to where you can skip ahead. But this is really to understand the major disconnect that the soldiers had from any empathy at all. So the Japanese got very creative in the ways that they decided to torture the Chinese soldiers and civilians. A quote from the book: "Chinese men were used for bayonet practice and decapitation contests. An estimated 20,000 to 80,000 Chinese women were raped. Many soldiers went beyond rape to disembowel women, slice off their breasts, and nail them alive to walls. Fathers were forced to rape their daughters and sons, their mothers, as other family members watched. Not only did live burials, castration, the carving of organs, and the roasting of people become routine, but more diabolical tortures were practiced, such as hanging people from their tongues on iron hooks or burying people to their waists and watching them get torn apart by German shepherds. So sickening was the spectacle that even the Nazis in the city were horrified, one proclaiming the massacre to be the work of bestial machinery. Many of the Chinese soldiers surrendered to the Japanese and promised them fair treatment in return for an end to the resistance. This came to a surprise to the Japanese military, who were trained in a tough military environment to never surrender, and that suicide was better than being captured. This increased the contempt that the Japanese had for the Chinese. Their cowardice disgusted them. And this is very similar to someone who is very abusive becoming disgusted by the person that they are abusing. This caused them to dehumanize the Chinese even more, comparing them to insects and animals. They ended up killing all of the surrendered soldiers and prisoners of war. The reasoning was that they did not have enough food for them and could not nor did not want to arrange to do so. On December 13th, 1937, the Japanese 66th Battalion received the following command: all prisoners of war are to be executed. Methods of execution: divide the prisoners into groups of a dozen, shoot to kill separately. And that's what they did. After the soldiers surrendered, there was no one left to protect the citizens of the city. They went in and they shot everyone. They looted everywhere. In every house, they would go and torture everybody, elderly, children, and babies. The troops went door to door and demanded entrance. When they granted, they began shooting. They looted the stores and they burned everything that they had no use for. No matter how young or old, no woman could escape the fate of being raped. Surviving Japanese veterans claim that the army had officially outlawed the rape of enemy women, but rape remained so deeply embedded in Japanese military culture and superstition that no one took the rule seriously. Many believe that raping virgins would make them more powerful in battle. Soldiers were known to wear amulets made from pubic hair of such victims, believing they possessed magical powers against injury. The military police, forbidding rape, only encouraged soldiers to kill their victims afterwards. Women who were raped by Chinese soldiers and became pregnant often secretly killed their children or themselves. At the time this book was written, which it came out in 1997, so it was written, before that, Iris Chang, the author, said that there was not any record of any woman who had admitted that their child was a product of rape from this time period. So if they did keep the child, it was a secret. Most could not, as it would be a constant reminder of the collective trauma, and a lot of these women felt they couldn't love such a child. A quote from the book: according to the surviving veterans, many of the soldiers felt remarkably little guilt about this. A quote from Shiro Azuma, who had admitted to his war crimes, wrote, "Perhaps when we were raping her, we looked at her as a woman, but when we killed her, we thought of her as something as a pig." Robert Wilson, who was the only surgeon in the city during this occupation, witnessed a massive gang rape of teenage girls ages 15 to 18. They lined them up in the dirt and were raped one by one by an entire regiment of soldiers, which is about 3,800 men. Some of these girls hemorrhaged and died, while others killed themselves shortly afterwards. I think the pain of what they went through at that time is almost incomprehensible and even very difficult to put yourself in that situation and try to picture you being there and experiencing that. It's one thing to be suffering for a long time and decide to end your own life, and it's another to be so extremely traumatized by an experience that you feel there is no other option but self-destruction. And that was the headspace for a lot of these women who were in Nanjing at the time. And this is the part of empathy where you think, if you were in that situation, would you have done the same? Not all victims were women, of course. Men were often sodomized or forced to perform a variety of repulsive acts in front of laughing Japanese soldiers. At least one Chinese man was murdered because he refused to perform necrophilia with the corpse of a woman. They also tried to coerce men who have taken lifetime vows of celibacy to engage in sexual intercourse. One Buddhist monk refused to participate in a gang rape and was castrated and bled to death. The Japanese soldier was trained in a variety of exercises to numb them against human instinct to not kill people who were not attacking. It was commonplace to participate in killing competitions. This was not unique to the overtaking of Nanjing. They participated in events like this all over China during the war. A new officer named Tominaga also had to be desensitized by his soldiers. He said that when he saw them, they had evil eyes. They weren't human eyes, but the eyes of leopards and tigers. And I thought that was a coincidence, considering that this video is about evil, and he literally said that that's what they looked like, and also compared them to predatory animals. Animals that operate at lower levels of consciousness. They are not civilized, so they act on instinct and in the moment. These people essentially dropped into their lower chakra centers in order to behave in animalistic ways. They regressed personally in consciousness to what they were capable of as human beings. They were taught how to behead and bayonet properly on Chinese prisoners. A lot of Japanese veterans openly admit to not feeling remorse or a sense of wrongdoing, even when torturing helpless civilians. They interviewed a man, Nagatomi Hakudo, after the war who felt this way. Then they interviewed him again after 60 years, and he is a changed man. At the time of the interview, the second interview, he was a doctor in Japan. He has built a shrine of remorse in his waiting room where patients can watch his trial in Nanjing and full confession of his crimes. Now he has a gentle and hospitable demeanor, making it hard to imagine that he was once a ruthless murderer. He says, "Soldiers impaled babies on bayonets and tossed them still alive into pots of boiling water. They gang raped women from the ages of 12 to 80 and killed them when they could no longer satisfy sexual requirements. He said he beheaded people, starved them to death, burned them, and buried them alive. It is terrible that I could turn into an animal and do these things. There really are no words to explain what I was doing. I was truly a devil." This is an example of a very drastic turnaround, and I think most people would agree it's insane that he was able to become a doctor after committing so many war crimes and confessing to it, and that he was even able to participate in society. It's very hard to grasp that someone can go from destroying people in the most disrespectful ways to helping them. This does show that it is technically possible to change after being an awful person, which of course, this isn't a new concept. There are tons of people who were once involved in drugs and crime or illegal activity, and they can change and find redemption. But is it ethical to allow such a person who has taken such extremes as rape and torture to participate in society? Most would say no. However, there are people who have committed such violence who are walking around without punishment or little punishment because either people don't know about the crimes or because the justice system doesn't actually always bring justice, especially if the perpetrators have money, power, or influence, or the backing of the government. I often wonder where the line is between punishing someone for the rest of their life and holding space for them to recognize and learn from their own mistakes. I wonder what a more evolved society would do and how they would handle something like this. But I believe a more evolved society would not even have this kind of behavior present because they've already evolved past that type of behavior. The society does not have people like that because they already know it's wrong. Creating a better society is about making sure that children have the healthiest upbringing possible and to be treated with love and respect. But achieving that for everyone involves massive societal changes to make raising children with love and everything they need the priority, so that they grow up to be more well-adjusted, kind-hearted, and compassionate. People who die in traumatic ways will often carry that trauma to the next lifetime and often have certain subconscious fears that they cannot quite explain. For example, if someone died due to drowning or an avalanche in a past life, it could translate in this lifetime to a fear of drowning, swimming, or water in general, or claustrophobia. This was discussed in a book I read called Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. I believe it also works the same way with violent people. In a past life, if you were someone who was being very selfish or killing people or harming women, I think that shadow may remain imprinted on your soul, and it will have to be overcome or else you will repeat the pattern. People who say that evil people are possessed by a dark energy or a demon. I personally cannot perceive such beings consciously, but other people do speak about it on the internet or other people I've met. And I do believe that there are people who can perceive certain things of a different realm that I cannot. Obviously, some people experience psychosis, but I don't think everybody who speaks on the unseen realm is experiencing psychosis. I think they are perceiving things in a more intense way. Some people naturally have a stronger connection to this unseen realm. I do believe everything in our world is a manifestation of our collective thoughts, beliefs, and actions. The concept of demons is not something outside of ourselves, but a manifestation of humanity's collective darkness. I do feel like the more people who put collective thought and energy into something like a god, a goddess, or a demon, it gives it life and power. It doesn't matter if the thoughts are good or bad. It creates their form in the energetic realms. I think hell, eternal punishment, and demons are a way to control humanity and keep them in that state of fear and in that darkness. I think that these beings can be thought more of as independently and not put so much in a box of good and evil. Demons can represent and connect with the repressed and darker parts of themselves and humanity. They encourage facing the pain rather than running from it. They are feared because of their power to face the shadows and not let it destroy them. It empowers them. They can be great teachers and naturally be a little edgy about it instead of being all like love and light. I think that's kind of like the difference if you think about like angels and demons. They have different ways of teaching you about these different aspects of yourself as a human. From the pain and ashes, they are born again. And the people in control of the world do not want most of the population to be masters of transformation. So these beings were demonized, just like how certain groups of people are demonized simply for being who they are. Fear, at the end of the day, is an illusion and a distortion. It is not real and is not tangible, but it will control you if you let it. Any concept that puts you in a state of fear is not one that resonates with me. It is a distortion. I do think the world we live in as a matrix, and demons are part of this fear-based programming to keep you stuck. But it's your own mind doing the trapping, not some outside force. I believe it is an aspect of yourself that is in distress. However, I don't have direct experience dealing with demons, and so I won't die on this hill, but this seems to be my perspective. That makes sense to me. I listened to this YouTube channel or podcast on here called Astral Club, where Rick, who does them, shares his experience that he has had in the astral realm. A lot of his stories correlate with the belief that the afterlife is essentially whatever you think it is. Where we go is where we think we go. Whatever heaven or hell looks like to you. Which really makes the most sense to me, as a big part of our reality is what you think and believe is what you are. We have more power in shaping reality than what is taught to us. This is a matrix and it can be altered. We just have to know how to do it. In a few of his stories, he speaks of the lower astral, where often there are beings that are in a very low vibration. They are very sad and angry. Some of these are souls of people that have passed away, but they don't realize that they have died. Some of these are souls that have gotten caught up in addiction and they're not passing over and they're in limbo. They are still too attached to substances and the physical world. Some souls stay in this place for hundreds of years, or I think time works differently there, so it's kind of like, they stay there for a long time, or even longer if they believe that they have been bad in this lifetime that they have lived on Earth. They're not reincarnating because they can't face the reality and the heaviness of their actions. Or they are avoiding their life review or judgment, which is needed to continue reincarnating. This lower vibrational place is essentially like hell. And you stay there because of your own thoughts and perceptions, not because something else is keeping you trapped there, which is often much harder to escape when you feel like you belong in such a place. Nanjing was a hell, and it was not created by a mythological figure or demon. It was created by humans. Humans who had succumbed to the darkness within themselves. It is an energy that we all have the capabilities to connect with, and you must consciously choose not to engage with it. In tarot, the Devil card is associated with the sign of Capricorn because of its connection to the physical world, and Capricorn being an earth sign. It is not related to an actual devil, and it does not mean Capricorn is a bad sign. It is symbolism for your own negative thought patterns, addictions, materialism, excessive self-indulgence, toxic relationships, obsession with worldly pleasures, money or power, or suppressed feelings. There are a lot of parallels between that symbolism and the things that demons can drive you to do or embody. It seems that they are describing the same negative energies that we experience here on Earth, the dark challenges that can hold us back and become our downfall. I do believe that if you ruminate in your negative thoughts, you probably will attract lower vibrational entities or demons. They are attracted to that and they will keep you stuck in those same cycles. This also tends to happen to people who have active addictions. This can be very subconscious, and a lot of people don't even realize that they have like energy beings feeding off of their despair, but their behavior in the physical world will reflect it. These people tend to be very angry or miserable, and the presence of these entities keeps perpetuating these unpleasant emotions. They are beings that gain power by taking your light and happiness. It is important to try and master more control over the direction of your thoughts in order to starve out the entities. If you work to create more positive thought patterns, then the entities can't stay. Or like emotional regulation patterns. People often who have these entities attached to them will try and bring other people down with them. If you don't resonate with the concept of entities, as that kind of gives a visual of more of a supernatural being, then it can be interpreted as like negative thought forms. It is a manifestation or attraction to these negative thoughts in the mental plane. I find that the symptoms of having negative entities attached to you and being disconnected from your higher chakra centers are similar. You are disconnected from the wisdom and are more attached to the physical realm, aka the lower chakra centers. So, in summary, the factors that drive people to participate in evil types of behaviors, in my opinion, are social influence, the experience and history of the soul, such as past lives, abusive childhood or not dealing with the trauma and passing that trauma on to others, brainwashing by the media, the government, and propaganda, militarism, imperialism, and nationalism, which I will note is slightly different than patriotism. A big portion of what caused the Rape of Nanking was the extreme militaristic culture, which led to a total disregard for human life. This definitely is not the only account in history of something like this happening. There are many, like I said earlier, some going on now. And unfortunately, a lot of it seems to be forgotten by, the world, but especially the United States, because, the education system here is a little sus and getting worse by the day, it seems. But yes, this was a big point in Iris Chang's writing of this book, and that she calls this the forgotten holocaust. When this happened, China didn't push Japan to take accountability for a long time for a variety of reasons that the book does go into, but mainly political reasons and, having to do with trading between countries, and they wanted to keep the relationship good because they still needed to trade stuff with them. And Japan actually denied this happened for a while, and Iris Chang was a big driving force in getting them to acknowledge and take accountability for this. A quote from the book: "This book was written with George Santayana's immortal warning in mind. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And also the power of cultural forces to make devils of us all, to strip away that thin veneer of social restraint that makes humans humane, or to reinforce it." I have considered that if part of the reasoning for committing these evil acts is just lack of soul evolution, does that mean all souls may endure a lifetime in which they have committed such atrocities against other people and must learn to realize it is very harmful? Is this part of the process to break away from these past lives and lower animalistic states of consciousness? I would like to think not necessarily. I think it would depend on these soul incarnations. I think that there are people who have previously reincarnated on more evolved planets or higher dimensions of consciousness before coming to Earth. They're less likely to get sucked into violence due to their more evolved past carnations, where they understand that kind of behavior is not good. It is a spiritual concept that we are supposed to live different lifetimes in every perspective. I think perhaps we all have lived a lifetime where we do more bad stuff than good, and lifetimes where we do more good than bad. Another concept in spirituality is that I'm you and you are me and we are the universe and one with God or the universal consciousness. We are all mirrors, and therefore no one is better than anyone else. And it'd be nicer if we tried to not pass as much judgment to other people, as ultimately we are all the same consciousness experiencing itself in many different lenses. And so that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching.